Hey guys, my name is Rai. Today I wanted to walk through how I did my plus 16 workshop on my preservation evoker. Since the buffs we got on Tuesday, I felt a pretty significant power spike in our healing capabilities and our damage, and I'm really impressed with kind of the outlook on this class. I think going forward, Prez has a pretty good chance of being a competitive healer this season as compared to last season's. I don't know if it'll be in the meta, but with the kind of nerfs to Disc Priest, and if you are playing a Shadow Priest and maybe a Boomkin, I think Prez has a pretty good shot at being invited to some groups. It is on us though to keep changing the outlook and perspective on Prez, as it is a pretty challenging healer to play and requires quite a bit of patience. With that in mind, I'll walk you through in this video kind of the things that I did to tackle some of the more difficult healing requirements in this dungeon. Again, as always, you need to be pressing tip the scales before the key goes in to get that first free fire breath on this pull. Having that extra tip the scales is massive damage and massive healing, and you want to make sure that you kind of have that available for the extra haste buff. I am still running a heavy haste mastery build right now, but I'm probably going to be swapping back to crit haste after the buffs. It feels like my healing is completely overkill, and with the buffs even in a 16 and this is kind of our first attempt at it, I felt like I could overheal everything completely fine. On that first pull, you want to make sure that as soon as this pack starts, that you ramp your stasis with Tip the Scales, Spirit Bloom, TA, and Dream Breath. Mostly the reason why is just to kind of get your Threads of Fate out from your Tip the Scales, and then make sure that you can deal with some of the secondary damage out here, which is the leaps from the Strider Tonks. Your team's going to be taking a ton of damage from these little leaps, and making sure that your team has tons of hots on them and are being spot healed through these leaps is kind of your imperative. Our DK procced a huge Blood is Life on this pull and just kind of obliterated the pack before I really needed to even release my stasis, so somebody got wasted. But as this pack's probably going to live longer in some of your keys, and most of my keys it typically would. I was like very lucky from him. He kind of obliterated it. Make sure that you do have healing out. Your tank's gonna be taking a ton of damage, and your healer or your DPS need to make sure that they can stay topped. It is helpful for you to be able to use your stops there on that bull as well, such as your tail whip and your wing buffet. But try to not use wing buffet too early if the mobs are stacked. There are a lot of classes that benefit greatly from mobs being stacked up. As you can see on that first debuff there, I am rescuing my priest, and now for every single one of these ground pounds, I'm going to be doing a life bind Spirit Bloom combo. I kind of haphazardly throw out my Dream Breath when I feel like I need to, but it's not really that important for topping my team. Since the buffs, even on plus 16, Echo, 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 Burn Embrace, and Life Bind can keep my team almost completely topped. As you can see there, one Spirit Bloom and the secondary healing from the Spirit Bloom odd and chronowarden keeps us stopped. I do have a stasis ramped here, just to kind of, help me get through some of the damage, but I don't really need to. On this fight, I actually don't use any healing CDs because now our healing combo with just that Echo, 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 Burn Embrace, Spirit Bloom is so incredibly powerful. I don't think you really need to press anything else. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't, and it isn't a bad practice to just, be using Rewind, Month Communion, alternating your Renewing Blaze and Obsidian Scales, and making sure that you feel like your team and yourself are cozy for this encounter. Remember, somebody that does get targeted by the boss's ability that throws them up in the air, in cohesion with getting a ground pound effect, could global them, so that flipper plus the ground pound can be a lot of damage. As an evoker, you do have rescue, and you should be using it on one of your ranged DPS that don't have a lot of mobility. I would try to avoid on this fight at all costs, pressing Burden Embrace to go into melee, and using it on yourself as much as possible. Remember that you can rescue people down just like I did there with my Shadow Priest, and it'll save them some uptime and give you guys a shield going into the next ground pound if it lines up. I don't use rescue here defensively because I don't know about my team's positioning, so I always save it here for when the flipper comes out and I'm next to one of my ranged DPS players. My melee are kind of on their own and they have to figure it out, but I do like babysitting my warlocks, my priests, my hunters, and other classes. If you are playing with a druid, you don't really have to babysit them too much because they can wild charge back in. As you can see there, I get kind of knocked up in the air and get a little bit scared. But even with our buffs too, remember that using a life spark proc in your life bind is exceptionally powerful. There are times in which sometimes I just negate or throw away the idea of putting out Spirit Bloom and just use that life spark prop to top my team. One thing to note though is remember that with Spirit Bloom Hots, you do have Primacy. Primacy is a talent in the chronowarden tree that increases your haste by 3% for each of your Spirit Bloom Hots out up to a maximum of 9. So just keeping your Spirit Bloom Hots out is 9% haste, which is a ton of damage and a lot of extra healing. Haste is god tier mode stat for this class. You're going to feel really good when you're turning a ton of haste because your cadence for being able to heal certain encounters is going to feel a lot easier. There are a lot of patterns in Mythic Plus that are completely reliant on timing, and haste helps you fix all of that. Right now as it stands, Prez's healing throughput is nuts, and just with a Spirit Bloom every single time, which comes up every, 12 to 20 seconds for their talents, just instantly top our party. The boss is over, and I've kind of talked about everything that you need to do on that boss to get through the healing requirement. Remember to focusing on Lifebind and Spirit Bloom also completely eliminates any position requirements you're going to need on Prez Evoker, as Lifebind doesn't really have a front-facing position, neither does Spirit Bloom. I think too that I'm trying to debunk this a lot with my friends. When they play, they say, where should I play with Prez? And honestly, my answer is I don't care as long as you're not like 80,000 yards away, because the fact like nobody has to really be in my frontals. Spirit Bloom carries a lot of my healing, and Dream Breath is really the kind of secondary effects on something like the Rod in these pulls. As we get into this pull, this is double drill, so I'm going to show you how I do my setup here. I Fire Breath for some Life Giver's Flame action here. I make sure I caught my tank. I Echo, Burn Embrace, Stasis, Tip the Scales, Spirit Bloom, TA, and Dream Breath. Ideally too, when you're fighting double tank, you want to make sure that your team can get a stop on the first set of Corrosive Bloods. If they get stopped before the first AoE, you'll be able to heal that entire ramp with just Stasis. You'll see that I committed Zephyr early by mistake, but if I need to, all I need here is Obsidian Scales, and I can alternate Renewing Blaze. If your team does do this pull, remember too that you can rewind, you can communion, and you can use all sorts of buttons to get through this. Ultimately though, the first two sets can be completely covered by Tip the Scales and Stasis. You'll see on the first boss that I always hold Tip the Scales and Stasis just for this next pack. You never want to resend on that boss because you always want it here for the first drill. If your team only is playing one drill, which is completely fine as well, you still want to keep that same combo. Make sure you're not resending Tip the Scales and Stasis on the previous boss, that you have it here. On all this trash, I kind of initiate that we don't want to actually be stopping these gunks. I'll just kind of heal through them because we want to be stopping them when we pull in a bunch of the dogs. As you can see, just with Lifebind here, I can get my team topped very quickly. I'm doing damage where I can, just with Fire Breath. Life Giver's Flame is kind of healing up my party, and I'm just kind of letting these things go through unless my team decides to stop them. The corrosive gunks aren't that deadly, but they're really deadly when fighting a drill. You'll see in this route we fight no more drills, and we elect to skip the last one, waiting for its patrol. But it doesn't really matter too much because all this healing absorb is very easily healed by Prez. You'll notice that just with a Dream Breath or a Spirit Bloom with Lifebind, you'll be able to get through it pretty easily. I still think even when I'm going to be dropping a ton of mastery, I think it's going to be more than fine. If you do happen to get a corrosive gunk off during the dog pulls, make sure that you're ready to press something big. Here, I tell my team that they don't really have to press anything because I am going to ramp here with my stasis, and I have like infinite healing right now, so I'm not too worried. I do kind of panic and dispel in my stasis. That kind of sucks right now, but it doesn't matter too much as ever since the buffs, I feel like I could play 5 dogs pretty easily and be completely okay. If you are in communication too, this is a great time to kind of tell your team when they should wall, when they need to like hit their buttons or their dwarfs. But I even tell my priest here, like, don't mass dispel, don't press anything. As soon as I have stasis prepped, I want to be able to use it. So here we do a pretty big dog pull, I think. We kind of do all the dogs. So now this is 6 dogs. This is probably the scariest pull in the entire dungeon. I am getting all my pre-healing out, and immediately too, I tell my team not to empty the first set. I'm going to be using Tip the Scales, Spirit Bloom here with my buffed haste. My priest does still mass dispel, which is fine, and unluckily our druid gets 2 leaps of this dog in the first pack. Our Vengeance Demon Hunter does start early, but remember, I still have Communion, I still have Rewind, and I can use any button I need to get through this pack. So we AMZ, and I'm pressing literally everything to make sure we stay alive. I'm dispelling where I can, and I'm making sure I TD my priest, I dispel him, and then I hit Emerald Communion just to help top ourselves off. You can use anything on these specs to keep yourself alive. I would say the easiest way to do it is always dispel the first person. If you need to use stasis caught, you can, but it's very, very slow since the dogs are not synced. You're not going to be able to stasis caught everybody at the same time, and you might have a really tough time with it. I'm still sitting on rewind if I need it, and I'm just making sure that I can heal my team up where I can. Kujo is kind of an interesting healing requirement as the healing's very periodic. I would make sure that every time that you dispel a tank, I would have like an echo or two out, Burden Embrace, and then start ramping a healing cycle. You'll see here in this first one, I immediately hit stasis. Even though my mana is pretty low, I don't really need mana on this fight. I don't really need mana anymore. I'm going to be spending a lot and then just kind of using Disintegrate to kind of get myself back up to full. I do dispel my tank and immediately release my stasis, and now I'm off to kind of the easier part of the healing requirement. When these leaps go out, I'd recommend putting some echoes out on your team. Remember too that because of positional requirements, Echo and Lifeline don't really have any, so if somebody's out of range, keeping Echoes out is going to be able to top them pretty quickly. And then make sure that you're always on the side that your team is hiding on. I do top my Druid a little bit late here, but he is okay, and I do have Tip the Scales coming up, so I Zephyr because we're not at 100%. I Burden Embrace, and I Tip the Scale Spirit Bloom. Before I go any further, I would say that there's no appropriate or actually set cadence for this fight. I think there are tons of good approaches that you could take to this. So just make sure that you're keeping an empowered spell for every time that you're going to be dispelling the tank debuff. And then when these flame vents go off for that second debuff of every phase, it's completely fine to just, slow heal everybody. Remember too that the first one here, so I'll kind of walk through this debuff is the harder one to heal. So the reason why is because you're going to have leaps here in a couple seconds. You want to make sure that everybody's completely top for the leaps, and then for the expel of the leaps, so afterwards, this can be healed up a little bit later. The reason why is you have tons of time between this and the actual next bite that you have to dispel, so you can hold on and your tank can kind of sit that bite for a second if he needs to while you're going to get your team topped, and then this is the time where you're kind of recovering. Remember, when you're hiding behind the box, you have tons of time to kind of put some echoes out, maybe life bind, heal your team up, and then kind of pad if you need to with some grace period reversions. I do release my stasis there again, and now I'm just farming back some mana on the boss with Disintegrate. In terms of using your wall and your blaze in this fight, it's completely fine to use them on either mechanic. I think using your blaze on CD is very good, as it'll help you get topped and keep your mastery kicking in. Remember that when you're higher health than your party members, you're going to be doing increased healing based on your mastery, meaning that if you're below them, your mastery is going to have 0 effect and is going to be a completely wasted stat. Your Burden Embrace and healing yourself always benefits from your mastery, so on fights like this, keeping your ramp on yourself is always very good. But otherwise, as you can see here, just with a little bit of triage healing, letting my hot stick and not panicking, I'm very able to heal this fight easily. I do get a little bit concerned there that we're all split from the box, but my Dream Breath does manage to hit my team, and we're more than okay. I do recommit Tip the Scales on this boss, and if you needed to, I could hit Emerald Communion here, I could hit anything I want, including Time Dilation to keep my team alive, but you have to realize that there's a big RP between this boss and the next one. One thing that you can do as well is remember that Hover does provide a 20% DR. So anytime you're going to be dispelling or dealing with a big AoE such as leaps, you can be pressing pre-hover to get a 20% damage reduction on that effect. Using Obsidian Scales is probably highest value on the leap, as it'll last for the leap and the jump itself. Sorry, the dot. Evoker here can also rescue on the conveyor belt, so if you haven't seen that yet before, you have to be up on the conveyor belt a little bit, kind of go up, and then you can rescue over, saving your team a ton of time. I would suggest if you're trying to do this, trying to take one of your slower DPS, maybe your DK, maybe your Priest, maybe your Hunter. Remember, Rogues can Shadow Step, Mages have quite a bit of movement speed, Demon Hunters can leap, so you want to make sure that you're grabbing something that's a little bit slower to get up here. The Swallow Pack isn't very deadly, you can pretty much just do damage for a good portion of this key. And at this point here, until the next 2 packs, I'm kind of just hitting, Living Flame where I can. I apologize for all the BattleNet spam on the right hand side, but Seems like everybody's coming online this morning. I forgot to minimize it. The next pull in the dungeon is the 3 guards, and they do put out a pretty nasty debuff. If you aren't in communication with your team, there are a couple approaches that you can take to this next pull. I would suggest one is considering Stasis Dispels. Stasis Dispel works really well in this next pack if you aren't in communication with your team, or you don't have classes that can substantially deal with it, or if you don't have dwarf racials from classes like DKs or warriors. Here I elect to actually not use my Stasis Dispel, as we do have Mass Dispel, and I do have a lot of healing available, but our priest does Mass 1. I kind of tip the scales out, I prepare a healing ramp, I Zephyr, and then I'm just using my empowered spells. The damage that goes out from the AoE is a lot, so make sure that you're using things here like Zephyr and Tip the Scales, because you don't need them for a very long time. Remember, the next boss has 0 healing requirements, so anything you need to use on this trash is completely acceptable. The tank's also very easy on Prez, and I'll show you the tricks and the setup that I do to heal the tank, only using Stasis. I don't even think I use Obsidian Scales or Renewing Blaze, even though I could. On this AoE here, if I need to, I'm watching to use Rewind, but honestly, Renewing Blaze and Scales is more than enough to get through the damage pattern. If you need to, you can commit Emerald Communion or Rewind there, or prep an entire Stasis. As this pull starts, you should have Echoes out, and you're just going to be hitting Living Flame for some Essence Burst procs. Echo, 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 Life Bind, Stasis, Big Spirit Bloom, TA, and then Dream Breath. You'll notice that I actually slow my casts and weave in my Living Flames between my healing. Stasis is so powerful, and so is Spirit Bloom, that my team's going to be completely topped when I release it, and my Spirit Bloom's going to overheal a ton. So letting your team drop a little bit here, prepping your new life binds with Echo, 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 Burn Embrace, and you can see that my team's health is just literally not moving. So weaving in these Living Flames is really good for your resource with your Essence Burst, and then you could see that I release my Stasis when my first Dream Breath falls. Remember, Echo, 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 wait a second, and then cast your spell to get your team topped. If you want to use Renewing Blaze here or Scales, you can. I think I use Scales for fun because I don't really need to, but it doesn't really do anything because our healing ramp is so powerful and potent on this. If you find your team a little bit slow, or maybe this tank is taking longer than you're used to, remember, it's completely okay if you want to commit Rewind or Emerald Communion. But it is good practice when you're fighting one tank to know how to heal it without any of these cooldowns, because the next pull after the next boss is going to be 2 tanks. This is probably one of the harder healing requirements of the season, and you need to be ready to learn how to handle that with your healing available. Learning heal 1 tank without anything is a good step and a good starting stone to be able to learn how to heal 2 at the same time, as you're not going to have lust on it, and you're not going to really have a lot to be able to handle that. For the first time ever in my WoW history, we do manage to get through this maze with nobody getting stuck. This is a huge time save for us, and kind of a big up on our key, as we're going to be fighting this pack and lusting the next boss. The reason why we elect to lust the next boss is it is absolutely deranged and chaotic. I think it's probably the hardest boss this season just because of RNG. Everybody thinks that they can be a good player and outplay it, myself included. You're gonna see, like, I'm pretty swift and I have some pretty good moves. I don't die, but you do end up losing uptime. You have to stop and think about where you are, what you're doing, and where your next position is. Lusting this boss means that you can reduce the chance of RNG of you being in combat for less time. Remember, the faster the boss kill, the less chance you have to deal with mechanics, etc. So you're going to see that we do lust this, and I'll show you guys the safe spot as well. If you do stand on the stairs at the start of this key here, you actually can't get hit by the saw blades. However, you can't use it for the entire fight. The problem is with this spot is that the fire beams will go through here, meaning that you are not immortal. You can also get that explosion on the ground, which makes it really hard for you to stay up there forever. But on this boss, for almost the entire duration, I am hitting Living Flame. Again, this boss is kind of deranged, so in Lust and Tip the Scales, you want to be spamming Living Flame for as much as possible. If you need to, get your Threads of Fate out, hit Spatial Paradox for movement speed, and hit Hover, and just blast the boss for as long as you can. We do lose our Boomkin there in Lust, which kind of sucks, but that's okay. We get him up here, and we're kind of back to our regular scheduled programming. Whenever I can, I go over to the safe spot just to give myself a breather. However, as Preservation Evoker, we don't want to be in here too long as we are going to be out of range. So if we do have a thing spawn at the other side of the map, I'm gonna have to get out of there pretty quickly. But as you can see, even on this thing, on this plant, I am hitting Living Flame quite a bit. I'm doing about 600k DPS right now, which is kind of insane. But this is going to drop off towards the end of the fight. As you know, I ran out of hovers, I have to move quite a bit more, and I'm more focused on making sure I live. Our priest does hit a beam there, he sits in disperse, and I do time dilate him. Without those two things, he is dead. So you're going to see here that the time dilation is just going to tick him down. But we do kind of manage to get stable here, and we're back to just hitting spark flux. Again, I cannot say it as much as I possibly can. This fight is deranged. I don't know how they designed this fight. There's no healing requirement, but I feel like I'm always really anxious doing this because you don't want to be that UG that, dies and then everybody's, pointing fingers and mad. And this is the easiest way to lose the key, right? Like, look at the saw blades here. I'm doing like some MLG, like NBA 2024 movement to try to not get slam dunked by LeBron James trying to cut my head off. But again, there's really not much to this. Hit Living Flame where you can. Disintegrate to stay a little bit mana neutral because you're going to need the mana for next pull if you need. And then Azure Strike in your movement globals. If you need to, you can also use TA. And I do commit Living or Renewing Blaze here for the Spark as it's on me, but I think that's a huge mistake as I don't have it for the double tank. It's important that I stay alive here though. I think I'd rather have used the Renewing Blaze than the health bot, so maybe it wasn't too bad of a move, but Yeezus and I do get trapped in between the 18 saw blades, explosion, fire beams, and fire puddles of hell, so do whatever you can to stay alive, but whatever you do not recommit Tip the Scales. Do not commit Emerald Communion, and do not commit Rewind, or you will die in the next pull. I would say that if you really had to let somebody die here because they got hit by a beam or got their head cut off, which they're going to get one shot by anyway, I'd rather that happen than not have everything going to the next pull. Going to this pull, I immediately put out reversions, echo. I would use Renewing Blaze here if I had it, and do not hit that Spirit Bloom Lifebind until that second tank comes in. Immediately I tip the scale Spirit Bloom, TA, Big Dream Breath, and I'm going into my next Lifebind here for the next part. Life Spark proc, and then just keep echo, life binding. I would wall late, not wall early, and make sure that you keep life binding throughout the start pull. Remember the same thing here as I talked about on the tank, you don't want to release stasis till your team gets low because it's instantly going to top them. So make sure that you're using a lot of your healing late and finishing your cast towards the end of these sonic pulses. I use Emerald Communion, now I use Rewind, make sure I have some golden hours out, and I'm hard casting Spirit Bloom. Your goal is to fit in and fill every gap that you have without Spirit Bloom. So using Echo, Verdant, Dream Breath, and then when you don't have a big Spirit Bloom and a Lifebind running, that's when you want to use things like your Rewind. You can call for defensives from your team like Darkness, etc. But as soon as you have Spirit Bloom, your team's going to be topped again. Keep your Dream Breath rolling as much as possible, and if you need to, you can commit Zephyr. I didn't commit Zephyr or Rescue there as I was trying to save them to see if we needed them, but we are extremely cozy and I was pretty happy with that encounter. Having Dark and AMZ did help a bit, so if you don't have those tools, just be wary. However, our Druid didn't even have Bark on that, and we were still okay. It's also recommended that your DPS save some damage for that pull. As you can see, if you scroll back in the video, I was doing 4 million HPS for the duration of that pull, which is quite a bit. If I needed to heal that longer, I think I could have, but also fine-tuning that pull to make sure that you're really spacing out your cooldowns is going to be really helpful for you. I think using Zephyr on the gather is completely acceptable too. So if you wanted to go in and Zephyr that pull and then commit pulse after, you can use both charges of Obsidian Scales, right? So making sure that none of those things are all overlapped is going to be really helpful to you. Using Emerald Communion with a Lifebind ramp is also going to be really helpful, but you also again want to do it late so it covers all of the damage. As you'll see, like a big thing in this video and a big thing that I haven't really talked about a lot, but is really spacing out your healing on Prez. Weaving in those Living Flames is going to help you a ton because Prez overheals a metric ton. And if you're not really careful with your healing globals, you're going to find yourself, overhealing and falling behind because you don't have buttons. Echo, Lifebind is a great way to kind of buy that recovery time. for things like fighting the tank, or I'll show you here on the last boss, just kind of like spacing out and making sure that you have adequate time in between heals is going to be kind of the make or break for playing Prez at a high level. These defense spots and this pack aren't too deadly, but make sure that if you don't have a shield, you have a healing ramp available. And if the shield goes down, you're pressing things like Obsidian Scales, Zephyr, and Rewind. I do commit Rescue to get my priest up here, and our DH is doing the meld skip. If you haven't already and you play Demon Hunter, you can see on my channel I actually do a quick guide on how to do the meld skip really efficiently and doing it this fast so that we can get into the boss. It's really easy. The video is about 30 seconds, so feel free to check it out. The first phase of this fight is all about doing damage. All you really have to do is hit Fire Breath, Living Flame, and then Disintegrate for mana neutrality. If somebody does get shock blasted here, just hit them with an Echo, a Reversion, and a one-tap Spirit Bloom, and they're going to be more than fine. This is a fight that I only Verdant Embrace to myself on almost ever. It's kind of like one of my hard rules now ever since of the incident, which we don't talk about. But I find if that you've Verdant to yourself in this fight, you're never going to get into the issue of kind of flying to somebody and flying through a ball. I don't think it's really a reasonable expectation for you to think that you can just like know where all the balls are at all time, especially in the second phase. So with that in mind, just try to, Echo then Verdant yourself if you're going to try to lifebind somebody. There are a couple close calls in this fight I do have due to positioning, but I'm going to show you guys how the best way is, I think, to handle it, and how that, even with playing 2 ranged DPS players and a Prez Evoker on a very long range fights, it is completely doable without kind of any error. We do have 1 death on this encounter, and it's to a ball, but nothing healing requirement oriented, so. In this phase, like I said, you're not really doing too much, but it is probably a good idea to be at a high level of mana for the next phase. If you do get the Mega Zap on you, in this phase, you could probably just commit to using Renewed Blaze. If you want to, you can use Scales, but again, another good habit and trick is just using that hover charge before the damage goes out. Remember, hover is going to be a 20% damage reduction for the initial hit of this mechanic, and this is a great mechanic to practice it on. Sometimes, I know that for some of you, and one of the lads I was coaching kind of asked me about, it's like, I really want to use hover DR more, I just forget, I forget. Using it on a phase like this where there's not a lot going on is a great way to practice. Like, just like, see I hit hover there, it doesn't really matter, I take 20% reduced damage, and that initial hit really softens the blow. In this phase, I always play middle. I always play in the back of the room as opposed to melee, and I kind of ping where I'm going to be going. But the idea is, as Prez, is you're not always going to be able to hit everybody with everything. Abuse the hell out of Lifebind on this fight, meaning that Echo, 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 Lifebind is going to be very, very powerful for you. The reason also I like to play at the back of the room is it gives me the most sight on orbs. As you can see, somebody gets targeted here. Jesus actually got double zapped, so I end up putting time dilate on him, and I end up prepping my stasis. I always stasis in the first phase of this fight because I'm going to be releasing it when the magnet's thrown out. If you need to here, you can Zephyr, you can Scales, but ultimately I would be making sure that you use your Renewed Blaze and your Obsidian Scales for when you get Mega Zapped. We kind of let the orbs come in here in a sec, and then I'm going to the back of the room. Remember, watch my positioning here. As we're kind of looking around, look at where the Druid is on the left-hand side. The Priest is now in the middle, but he's going to be swapping with me. And now that we're kind of, grouped up, our Druid does eat a ball, which is kind of unfortunate, but he does get rezzed. But see how our kind of positioning is right now and where I am. I have eyes on all the battlefields and everybody on my team. Meaning that I need to know if I need to Verdant somebody, which I'm really trying not to. I need to know where my Dream Breath funnel's facing, and kind of what I need to do to ramp. Remember, I do have Spatial Paradox if I need to for this key, and I am keeping reversions out on everybody. Our Priest does go into melee and kind of swaps out with our Druid, and now we're going into the mechanical arm phase to fight again. This one's a little bit sketchier, so I do Communion early to kind of get us stopped, and I commit Rewind at the end. We do drop a little low here, but that's just from the last pulse of the magnet, and we're kind of back into regular cadence. I do hover for the DR. If I didn't there, it would have killed me, as I don't have any Obsidian Scales or Renewing Blaze. And now I'm just trying to keep my team top where I can. Number 2, Lifebind is unlimited range, so if somebody does go out of range, having that Echo and Verdant Embrace on yourself to them is still going to give them the Lifebind effect. As you can see now, we're reset, and look very carefully at my positioning, the Priest positioning, and the Druid. We're fighting in the middle here, and if I need to, I'm just waiting to use any of my cooldowns to get my team topped. I Lifebind to myself again, like I said. I'm kind of scared here, but I do get a tip to scale Spirit Bloom off, and I'm just keeping eyes on my Druid. This is going to be the last pull here, and I release my Stasis to get us stopped. We call for AMC, I do Echo, 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 Lifebind, Dream Breath, our Druid does commit Health Pots, and now I'm just finishing the fight with a Spirit Bloom. Once you get the hang of this fight, it's not too bad. And remember, this is a plus 16. There's only a couple of these really timed in NA right now, and I think not even that many in the world. So this is a lot probably harder of a healing requirement than you're going to be used to in a couple weeks when you might get here. Or, you know, if you're doing this keen now, one thing to note is just make sure that you're using defensives appropriately in this fight. As Prez, the only way you can lose is if you go in melee and are turbo out of range of everybody, or you decide to overcommit your defensives such as Renewing Blaze or Obsidian Scales. Remember, try to keep Spatial Paradox for an emergency. If you are playing with multiple range, it is a lifesaver, and being able to get out that Echo Lifebind on yourself or somebody else in your team could be the difference between you making it or breaking it. Try to use Stasis in the regular phase, release it during the Magnet phase, and keep those Communions and Rewinds on deck in case something goes wrong. Anyway, that's everything I have for this video. Hopefully this was kind of helpful in your journey in playing Prez in Season 2 of The War Within. I think we are in a phenomenal place right now. I'm really excited for the next couple weeks, even next couple months. I'm really hoping that the 0.5 patch doesn't, turbo tune us away from anything. But with that in mind, thanks for all the love. Thanks for the support, and if there's anything else you would like to see or anything you think I missed or any questions you have regarding Prez now after the buffs, feel free to drop something in the comments and I'll do my best to try to get back to it. Remember to feel free to join my Discord if you're curious. I've had a huge influx of members in the past couple weeks come in on some of my content, so all my UI weak auras are available for free in there, and I can do my best to answer any questions as well. Until next time, I'll catch you guys in the next one.